Conversations on the Rocks, the podcast where the drink is strong and the stories are stronger. I'm your host, Kristen Dokas, and this isn't your average chat fest. Here, real people spill the tea alongside their favorite drinks, from the hilarious to the heart-wrenching. Each episode, a wild card. You'll laugh, you may cry, but you'll definitely learn something new. So grab whatever wets your whistle and buckle up. It's time to dive into the raw, the real, and the ridiculously human. Let's get this chat party started. Hey everybody, it's Kristen Dokas. You are tuned in to Conversations on the Rocks, the show that is as random as me, but try to stay specific. I, again, have my friend Sara Munro joining me, and if you listened in whenever she was here the first time, I'll make sure I put her first episode about imposter syndrome in the show notes for this one. She's up in northern New England, and by now I'm going to say there's daisies. We're going to pretend there's daisies everywhere and daffodils, tulips. Right? Tulips. Yes. So Sarah's got a ton of experience in a lot of fields, from fundraising and PR to digital media, and even a molecular biologist. Fancy. Sarah's now working with small business developments and gender equality organizations. And Sara, cheers again.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. My ice is almost gone, but it's still cold.
So, Sara, when we talked in our first conversation, we just kind of did if you will, an imposter syndrome 101. And there was some great content. I encourage you, if you have not listened to it, to go back and listen to it, because it looks very similar, but it looks very different to a lot of people. And one of the things that I wanted to bring you back on to talk about is how we can help. How can we help ourselves? How can we help our friends? How can we help our colleagues who might be suffering from imposter syndrome? So let's talk a little bit about mentorship and community support. And, if you've got some examples of things that have worked other than, we have conversations. I think it's pretty easy to pick out. I'm going to retract that. I was going to say, I think it's pretty easy to pick out somebody who's suffering from imposter syndrome. But I think as women, we are so good at pushing things down and faking it till we make it. And I think one of the things that would be advantageous to all women is for all of us to open our mouths and talk about it and say, okay, I know that I am really good at what I do. And I know I've had this conversation with you ladies in our mastermind group. It's like, I know what I'm doing. Why am I struggling with this? What is my mental block? What is it? So what are some things that we can do to, help our sisterhood with this?
Right. Well, in the last episode, we left off talking about having a squad around you. And that's one piece. You had mentioned to me at one point some of the discussion groups about podcasts where people are saying none of my friends and family are commenting. We say this as social media managers. Our internal staff aren't sharing our posts, aren't commenting on our posts to help amplify us. And when we think about a squad, when we think about support, it's not those closest and around to us, right? It's not our friends and family, because often they don't understand. They know us in a different light. Yes. They knew us as children, or they knew us when we were still figuring things out, or we were students, or whatever it was, or they just don't understand
or they don't care. They don't care. They care about
part
us.
Of their daily.
Right.
Yeah, they care
about us as humans, but it's they're like, okay, that's great.
Right. And so here's something when we talk about imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon, whatever we want to call it, right? The not fitting in, it's because especially people who are breaking in, who are the firsts, or who are the firsts to represent whatever identity it is that they're bringing to a table, they're not feeling like they fit in because they don't fit in. Someone hasn't been there. And we can feel it too if you're in a new position. I've been in positions that were brand new to the organizations that I've been a part of. And so I didn't fit in because I didn't fit in, right? That hadn't fit in. So I needed to build that structure around me. I had to ask in many cases, I had to be bold enough. It's really easy for me with, the experience that I have to call out exclusionary practices, and I've had a lot of training in it to do it. I still get really nervous when I have to do it.
Well, sure. Nobody likes to buck the system. Oh, no, we love to buck the system, but we don't want to. I just don't think really it's in any of our DNA, or for the most part, it's not in most of our DNAs. Everybody wants things to go smoothly, right? And at the end of the day, everybody wants to be liked, right?
Yes, and I would say
and accepted.
Yet I think there's the cultural shift in the workplace, especially. We're talking about the workplace right now.
Right.
The cultural shift that has happened thanks to Gen X, millennials, Gen Z coming into leadership positions or rising through, or just our sheer numbers now, that we don't see work as the end all be all as it was. And especially after the last 4 years. And how many recessions have we lived through, Kristen, at this point, right? Yeah, exactly. Your work is not loyal to you. And so making sure that sometimes to protect yourself, it's not your worth is not in people liking you 100% of the time at work. And that's a hard realization to come to, and a hard cultural shift given the expectations of most of the leadership that's out there that are still older. That yes, we want you to be team players. We want you this way. We want you to speak up. We want you to be yourself, as long as you're the self that we want,
right,
that we see you as.
Yeah.
And that's where that not fitting in, that imposter syndrome, am I faking it? Sometimes people are faking it in a knowledge base, but a lot of times they're faking it personally, right? They're hiding so many parts of themselves that contribute even more to not feeling like you belong, right? You and I have naturally curly hair, right?
Yes.
I've straightened it many times to fit in workplaces, or what's expected of me, or there's a big event, and curly hair is not professional, right? So.
And I think a lot of our women of color understand that. People of color, not just women. I mean, but yeah, I'm on the flip side of that. I love my curls, and thank you, menopause, I've lost them. So now I'm having to straighten my hair out, and I hate it because I liked my curls. But
yeah.
What up?
Well, there's lots of things. Yes, certainly people with much diverse backgrounds than we have, the fitting in. But some of my personal experiences have been, I've used my middle name. My middle name is a surname. I've used my whole name in some workplaces because the appearance of being married brought more weight to the words that I said and the ideas that I brought up than the master's degree and the years of experience that I had. So think about that, right?
Yeah. It's, and one of the things I tried to, press on my girls for years and years and years, which is, you're not for everybody, and that's okay. You're not going to like everybody. Everybody's not going to like you, and it's okay. Just kind of move on, and just nobody's going to think about it after a while. That person's not thinking that much about you. It's just like, I think that's the other thing, is like, oh my God, what's everybody going to think? So I think that's another, spoke in the wheel of imposter syndrome. It's like, what's everybody going to think? Probably nothing.
Right.
Probably a lot less than you think. What are some,
right.
Do you think what are some strategies that you think, like, I think self-talk is a really big thing, but, and I'm not a scientist, and nor am I a trained psychologist, but I love psychology. And as we were talking in the last episode, or in the last time that we had our conversation, is that I don't get imposter syndrome very much, right? But I know what my inner dialogue is. And I know the things that I say to myself, on the inside, and the things that I say on the outside. So I'm a very positive and very self-confident person. And I'm not saying that imposter syndrome is only for people that are unconfident or insecure, but largely they are. So in the workplace, do we even really need a division between, because I would imagine somebody that's, feeling imposter syndrome in the workplace is probably feeling it in the other parts of their life.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So it's not just I'm not a good enough employee, or I'm not a good, and I can't do this. I can't manage my team the way, Billy over there manages his team. I would have to imagine that rolls into at home. I'm not as good of a mom as Sara is. And Sarah's always got these fun activities with her kids and these crafts and things like that. So it's that whole comparison.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so I think the question comes to what is success? Who's defining what is good? If I am not as good as someone, who set that standard? And is that standard still relevant? Now, my team works much different than, like I said, I've worked in roles that have never existed before. What I say is I'm very comfortable with ambiguity and making things up, right? We're on a train engine and we are drawing the map and laying the tracks and building the cars behind us as we move forward, right? That kind of new position. And so success can be different. Success, we as a diverse group can define what success is and what is good. Is this good? Is this event that we put together where we're expecting 300 people and we had 150 instead? The 150 had a phenomenal time. Everybody who was participated in it felt like they belonged, like they had a voice. Is that success? Yes, absolutely. That's success.
Absolutely.
Right? And so we can redefine those, and it can be a moving target too, that success can evolve. And we have all worked in this high pressure corporate capitalistic system for so long that success is only a number or only a metric or only checking off boxes. I hate people who just check off a box for the sake of checking off a box, whether thinking, if we spend one more day on this, have we brought in one more piece of information that makes this significantly better? And I'm not saying keep pushing down deadlines and things like that. I'm just saying the sake of checking off a box and saying it's done and that's success isn't always the best way to go. Kind of passionate about that.
No, really. So you saying that made me think of something I hadn't thought of in a while. But for about, 6 months between when I left the agency that I was working for and the pandemic, I was working for a Greek company. And the purpose of the company, the company in Greece was the best, highest, the most popular Greek dairy company in all of Europe, right? And the man that I was working for, 100% Greek, you know where this is going, and he tried to make me feel in a way that would have made me conjure up some imposter syndrome, right? And I was not having it. At that point, I was divorced. I'd done my battles. I was in my late 40s. It was right before. I was in my late 40s. And I was like, you know what? He's like, well, when I was doing this, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, that's not what we're doing here. You worked for Bacardi with a multi-billion-dollar marketing. We are literally and basically a bootstrap. Yes, the main company has all of the money in they've got millions upon millions and billions of dollars. We don't. We're basically out here bootstrapping this effort. So, and he was a traditional marketer, right? So my long-winded way of saying that would have been a perfect opportunity for me to go, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. He's right. I have no idea what I'm doing right now. But I was able to recognize, I'm like, we're not talking apples to apples here, buddy. We're talking apples and oranges. Actually, we're probably talking apples and pears and oranges and pears because it's not the same thing. So you can't compare. That's another, going back to the comparison thing. I think a lot of the imposter syndrome comes from people wanting to compare. Well, that's not how I did it. And then that makes the other person go, oh, well, if that's not how they did it, then that must be not how I should do it. And then it, you start tripping down the whole rabbit hole.
Right. And it gets so tiring too, when you're constantly rebuilding and facing the old habits and the implicit bias again and again. It gets tiring, and let's get back to that squad thing too. I've had to have very trusted confidants too, to say, do we keep going? I mean, how far do we push this? Especially when you're working in equity and inclusion work too. It's like, how much are we going to keep going? And because it's so important, of course we keep going, but we at least acknowledge and validate that it's hard to make change. And then, when it rears its ugly head again and you're excluded from a meeting about a project that's yours, and then be held to a different standard that is not the point of the whole project, it's just like, oh, it feels like I'm back at square one, and it's really hard to push forward. So getting back to that idea of a squad who's not your friends and family, unless you have friends and family who are working in your industry, who understand the work that you do really well, I think it's really important to have that outside support. And, it's funny, we talk about masterminds, right? The first rule of masterminds is not to talk about masterminds. It's something that men have always done and different corporate structures have always done. If you are in the in crowd, then you are invited to sit at the table at whatever event, or you are playing golf or tennis or whatever sport it is. I had worked in one place where this handful of people would go out to a shooting range, no joke, and come back with all of these ideas and say, this is what's happening, and didn't include anybody else in the decision making, and wonder why people are upset, right? So having that group of people where you can bounce ideas off. And I think it's critically important if you are working for yourself or working for a small team, or like I have been in a position where I got to work with other organizations. So my work was more external, and we created our own little mastermind or support group or collegiate, whatever you want to call it. We became our own little work group. While we were still connected to our main organizations, we had our own little work group where we supported each other and did problem solving and all of that. And you don't have to pay. When we talk about masterminds, a lot of people think, oh, it's some subscription thing. You can make your own rules and make up your own group and find support in different ways, right? So I'm in a mastermind. I also have an accountability partner when it comes to we share. She's more of an operations person and I'm more of a social media person, so we share expertise back and forth. But personally, we're trying to do some habit changing, and we're accountability buddies. And so I know that she will hold me accountable. If it was one of my friends, we would just say, oh, it's 6 a.m. I'm not going to work out. No, you can stay in bed. You'll just say to your friend, no, you can stay in bed. You have a lot going on, right? No, my accountability partner and I, we're holding each other to the promises that we make to ourselves and to each other.
Right. And you have to do that. So you just reminded me of another situation too, speaking of that, with the squad. So back in over 15 years ago, again, I've been doing this for over 15 years, there was a group of us, and you'll appreciate this, there was a group of us, women, ladies in technology, that we all met on Twitter, right? So it's kind of like the former, remember the forums, the chat rooms and things like that. So that was and I monikered us the Broads Who Tweet, the BWTs, right? And I decided, and I think just here last week was the 15th anniversary. The first one was the BW. I called it the BWT retweet instead of retweet.
That's cute.
And we went away. I rented a giant house down at the beach, down at Carolina Beach, and there were a dozen of us, 15 of us that went down there for the weekend, for Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and we came home on Sunday. And all we did is drink coffee, sit in a circle, and And because, again, social media was very new at that time, but nobody wanted to let people know what they didn't know. And it became a safe space. It became a safe space for us, for like Sarah could ask, like, I know I should know this, but, how do I embed a pen on a website? And it was, and if you couldn't go to somebody else because they're like, well, shouldn't you know that because you're blah, 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 blah. It was the safe place to do it. And we'd be like, oh my God, girl, let me show you. We got you. We're going to show you. And it was the most amazing and incredible experience. And we did about 3 of those. And then, life happens and it just kind of tapered out. And it's kind of like what we do. And it's just that place where you have the right people around you that know what you do and can help. And there is no judgment here.
Right. And that can be extended into workplaces too. When we talk about how can we make this systemic change, at least in the world of work, there's a lot of other things that have to happen community-wise and socially and culturally wise too. But in the world of work, where knowledge is power and people hold on to it, right? How many times have you been in a meeting, you've been waiting for someone to give you information before the meeting as part of your presentation, and they don't, you get called out on it for it missing, and then that person swoops in and says, oh, well, here, and delivers it and gets the praise typically, instead of people saying, why didn't you do that before?
Right. And it's not the person that failed to give it to you that looks like an ass. It's you.
It's you. So in the workplace, when we talk about how do we combat imposter syndrome, when people are feeling like they don't know what they're doing or they're not fitting in, is checking in with them and creating a space where people feel safe enough, psychologically safe enough to say, I don't know this. And that's where you can say, well, I do. Let me show you. I was in your position. I had a first day, or I was in a learning curve for every job. Everybody is in a learning curve for every job. And the piece about social media is that they move the damn buttons all the time, right?
Every day.
Exactly.
That's why people like you and I exist, because they move it every freaking day.
Exactly.
And something you said, I don't know if it was earlier in this segment or the last time that we talked, we were talking about longevity, loyalty, our parents and the, and the boomers, they were in it for the long haul. That doesn't exist anymore. And I wonder if some of this is if people aren't actually afraid, using air quotes, afraid to come and say, Sarah, I really don't know what's going on, because we're such a disposable workforce. Because do you think people are just afraid that if they admit they don't know something, that they're going to get, booted to the curb? I mean, granted, that's worst case scenario, right? But it's the business environment right now is just so toxic itself that I think a lot of people feel that one false move and you're out the door. I mean, how many companies do you know of anymore that actually A, have an HR department, B, follow protocol? There's that little fun. Sorry, if you're not watching,
hey, I gotta love it.
You missed that. I got some thumbs up going on my screen, but you got to go to YouTube to find that. But you see where I'm going with this? Do you think some of that is just that intimidation, which, I mean, really, what is imposter syndrome but being intimidated over a situation?
Right. I think it is complicated, because the systems that are in place were placed by people who built them around loyalty, around compliance, around you need to fit into this box that we have created, and then espouse values that say, but we want you to be yourself. So no. And when you show up as yourself, right? When you show up with your curly hair, or you show up with culturally significant clothing on, or you speak a different way, oh no, that's not what we wanted, right? So of course people are feeling even more insecure and feeling like they can't be themselves at work either, and sometimes can't be themselves in their communities.
Right.
And I think it just exacerbates the issue. on top of, we are in a tenuous economy. And so I guess one of my recommendations would be adjust what does success look like? Is it making six figures, or is it making less and feeling better about what you do and feeling like you can be yourself in different places? You can speak up, you can change the system. And, coming from someone who's a career nonprofit person, right? It's easy for me to say. But I think the other thing is that the companies are going to get the backlash. The people who keep cutting folks, you make the smallest mistake, that reputation as an employer is going to follow you. There are a lot of forums out there, and people will say, I made the tiniest mistake and they let me go. Or now with digital products coming and going, who's going to work for a place that every 5 years cuts 30% of its workforce?
Yeah.
Right? So companies aren't really engendering the loyalty either. So,
but do they care? And especially in this day and time where there are so many companies that are buying companies up, and they'll keep things status quo for 6 months, and then all of a sudden everything's starting to change, and they're making it their way, right? So what's left behind is collateral damage, are the teammates that came from the OG company, and so many venture it's like the whole VC thing, the whole venture capital thing. Whenever they come in, start looking for a new job. Start looking for a new job, because one of two things is going to happen. They're going to give it 6 months, do it the old way, then turn around and do it the new way, and then everybody's gone that was from the original company, or they're just going to sell it. Either way, you're out of a job. So it's just like kind of harsh, but not everyone is cut out to work for themselves.
No, yes. I hate work for myself, and boy, my boss and manager can not be easy to work with.
Same. Mine never gives me days off.
Yeah. When we talk about corporate America and toxic capitalism, that's a whole other show. I can't help but think that it's going to eventually catch up with them. I remember it was a company in North Carolina, and I heard them. They were like interviewed on some news show or something. I want to say around 2000. I think they were called SAS. It was one of the first software as a service companies, and they actually are called SAS. And the owner and founder of it said, the worst thing I can do for my company is take it public. And he built, I don't know if it still exists, I don't know if they sold, merged, whatever, but the way that they built that company, where they had on-site childcare, they had intramural sports, they had a clinic, so like, seasonal allergies, or you need a stitch or whatever, little minor things, you could go there. If you think about productivity wise, you have your employee staying on campus and not taking 2.5 hours of sick time to go have their sniffles checked out, right?
It's a mutually beneficial thing.
Yeah,
it helps the company and it helps the team members.
Right. And now I'm based in the Northeast. I think every community in the country has a housing issue, especially workforce housing. Back when corporations and companies were building, there were company towns. I live in a rural state, and the companies like the Marble Company, Vermont Marble, is in the Supreme Court. It's in, these huge estates and all Washington Monument, all kinds of places. That company had housing. They would bring in workforces to learn the marble industry and to work, and would provide housing, and would have, I know there's one big insurance company in Hartford, Connecticut. They've merged. It was Aetna. It's now something else. But they did the same thing back in the 1910s, 1920s, is that they had on-site healthcare. They had a cafeteria. They had educational benefits, right? So,
but you know what the difference is? That was a time when it was people over profit. And now good luck finding any company that's people over profit. It's all profit over people.
Costco.
This is true.
Yep.
This is true.
And
but I mean, okay, I shouldn't say none, but it is so hard.
Or they're smaller. They're regional. They redefine success, and they redefine what they want for their people and their customers and their communities. And they're learning, and they're more progressive.
Some podcasts sound old, weather-beaten, and dull. Now, there's a podcast called Wheeler's Dog. Made with space-age polymers, Wheeler's Dog podcast requires no rubbing, no buffing. It is a humor podcast that restores the luster, makes the ears refreshed again. We ran the Wheeler's Dog podcast through 50 consecutive car washes. Despite all the scrubbing, the harsh detergents, and steam, the Wheeler's Dog podcast retained its glow. Get the Wheeler's Dog podcast wherever you get podcasts.
And going back to what you say about what does success look to you, I think that's another conversation that needs to be changed as a society, right? Because think about it. Everyone is told, if not literally, then subliminally, that your value is literally linked to your value, right? And it takes you a while, and I know there's been study upon study done that it's like, yes, that's very true. Money, it does make you happier, but only to a certain point. You have to be able to, as long as you're able to pay your living expenses, right, and a little bit extra, anything above that, if there's that threshold, like if you can't pay your bills, you're miserable, and money is the only thing that's going to make you happy. But once you have all of your things taken care of, anything above that is marginal as far as your happiness goes. So I think the dialect and the conversations we need to have, especially with our young people, is like, it's not all about the money. Yeah, sure. I mean, if you want to make $250,000 a year, that's fantastic. However, when are you going to spend it? Because you got to work the hours to make that $250,000 or whatever your number is.
Right.
So it's redefining success. What does success mean to you? For me, it's being able to not work 80 hours a week, have the ability to only work with people that I want to work with. I don't want to, happiness to me means being in a position where I don't have to take a client on who I know is going to be a nightmare client just because I lost one and now I need to pay the bills, right? So I know what my number is. And I think that's really important. I think everybody needs to know what their number is. Whether you work for yourself or whether you work for somebody else, what is your number? What is the absolute bare minimum that you can make in order to go back to that threshold of this is the amount of money I have to make in order to pay my mortgage, my car payment, my insurance, my whatever. And then you know that as long as I make that, I'm okay. Now, if I make more than that, hey, I might be going on vacation this year. Right.
And savings too.
Savings.
Be fiscally responsible. Yeah. So knowing what that, I also call it the walk away number, right?
Yes.
What's the number? It's not worth it anymore for the grief. And getting back to the theme of the show too is in fighting that imposter syndrome. It's like, I don't belong here for a number of reasons and part of that is that it's not fitting my definition of what I want out of my life and what my why is, right? Why are you here? Why are you doing this work? And what it means to your success too. And sharing that, again, what we were talking about a few minutes ago too, knowledge is power, right? Sharing these kinds of tips with people, because pay transparency or finances, you never talk about money, right?
Right.
Or that was a social norm that you don't talk about money.
And we're going to start winding this down, but you just said something that is so important. And I think it leads into this. So you're talking about doing something that makes you happy, right? So if you are, anytime I have ever been doing something that I am passionate about, have you ever questioned your abilities?
That's a really good question. I'm thinking back to one of my most favorite jobs, and I will name that job. A lot of times I veil the bad stories, I'll veil behind, once upon a time I did this. But the time that I worked in public health, where we were all smart, capable people who had great ideas and were willing to share them and try something, we didn't feel imposter syndrome.
Nope.
In that space.
Nope.
And we worked with a lot of diverse communities. We had a lot of voices coming to the table. We had a lot of different communities to serve. And we thought beyond what had been done to what could be possible. And maybe that is one of those secret sauces.
I just thought of that.
Yeah.
So the old saying of find a job or do something that you love and you'll never work a day in your life. Maybe as we take an exit on this, find a job that you love, find something you love to do, and you'll never have imposter syndrome.
Yep. And I want to add something to this too, just the whole piece about lifting each other up, whoever that each other is in your life. And I would say open the door to people who don't look like you, open the door to people who have never been in the places where you have been too, is to remember that by doing that, it doesn't diminish your place either. I've read and I've heard everybody quote this, by lighting someone else's candle, it doesn't diminish mine.
Exactly.
Right?
Now you got 2 candles burning and it's twice as bright.
Exactly.
Sarah, this has been such a great conversation, and anyone that knows us knows that we can continue going on and 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 on. So I guarantee you guys, Sarah will be back, and we'll have plenty more to talk about. So until the next time, friends, lift your glasses high and your spirits higher. Take care, everybody. See you next time. As the saying goes, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. And that's a wrap for this week's episode. A big thanks to my guests for sharing their story and to you for listening. Don't forget to share the show with your friends and spread the words. And if you'd like to be a guest on the show, the link is in the show notes. Till next time, cheers.